Hi, everyone, and welcome to another panel here at YALLWEST. This one is titled Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed, which is the title of our anthology that's coming out on September 14th, later this fall. I am Saraciea, the editor, to our panelists. So I'll start with who I see at the top right. We have Kahlil Haywood, this will be their debut creative nonfiction piece in the anthology. Then we have Natasha Diaz, the author of Color Me In. Then we have Zakiya and Jamal also making her debut nonfiction essay here. And last but not least, we have Mark Oshiro, author of Each of Us a Desert. So I'm really excited to be talking to all of you. Obviously, a lot of thought and care went into curating the authors for this book. I wanted to make sure that so many different voices from the Latinx diaspora were represented. So I would love for each of you to sort of go around and just say sort of what region, what country you're repping, so we can sort of give the attendees a little bit of the diaspora taste of what's to come in this anthology. So I'll start with Mark. You first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi, y'all Fest, or y'all West, excuse me. Thank you for doing this, Teresa. I'm so glad to be a part of this anthology as well. So I'm taking a very interesting part of the diaspora in that I'm adopted. I'm a transracial adoptee. What I know of my biological parents is, so I have heritage in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico. But my adoptive parents are white and Japanese Hawaiian, which is why I have a Japanese last name, which often confuses people. When I show up, they see that name and they expect an Asian guy, and then they get me. So I'm fulfilling a very specific, very non-traditional form of the Latinx diaspora.
Yes, I love it. Perfect. Zakiya, do you want to
Kia.
go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here with y'all. Haha, or y'all West. I am Cuban. My my grandma and my mom's side of the family all hail from Havana.
Dope.
Dope. Oh, Jinx. I heard someone else say dope too. Natasha, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I am multiracial, so the Latinx part of my identity is my grandmother was from Nova Iterania, Bahia in Brazil. So that's where I'm repping.
Amazing. I was so happy to have a Brazilian writer as well because I feel like that's also lacking in YA. But we'll come back to that. Khalil, can you let us know what you're repping?
Yo, West, I'm excited to be here. I'm repping Central America. My family is from Panama, both sides.
Amazing. And of course, I would be remiss not to say what I'm repping. So, my family is indigenous from Honduras. So, I am repping the Black Honduran and Garifunas of the world. So, I'm really excited about that. So, I want to pivot really quickly because everyone who is here with us as panelists, specifically in YA, there aren't a lot of Brazilian YA writers. There aren't a lot of Black Panamanian or even Panamanian YA writers. I've seen maybe one or two, well, maybe more than one or two Cuban writers, but not really any Black Cuban writers. And then and Mark, in your case, you're repping a few Central American countries, but in addition to that, I feel like being a transracial adoptee, you also don't really see that in YA. So I'm wondering if each of you can just talk a little bit about if these things were in your mind when you were crafting your pieces for Wild Tongues Can't Be Tame. I know for myself, I sort of wrote about discovering how I didn't know I was Honduran growing up. I just thought I must be Puerto Rican or Dominican because that was sort of what was largely known. So it would be great if we can hear how your identity sort of tied into your essay. And we'll start with you, Zakiya.
Okay, you. Wow. All right. Hi. Hello. Yeah, it was like the main premise of my essay. So my essay is called Cuban Imposter Syndrome. And for me, growing up, I knew I was Cuban, like I was aware that I was Cuban, but I never felt like I was Cuban enough. Obviously I'm dark skinned and like everyone hears my name, like kind of similar to Mark, and they think like I must be like from like Nigeria or something because my name is Arabic and Swahili. And so no one ever looks at me or looks at my name and thinks, oh, you're Latinx. And so for a while, I like just didn't tell people, like, because then you have to get into like, people are always like, oh, are you? Like, how? And then it's like a whole thing. And so it took a while for me to like actually be proud of the fact that I'm Cuban and that I'm Afro-Cuban. Because yeah, like I just felt like I wasn't what people expected and or like what the media portrays of Cuban people. So yeah, so it's taken a while for me to come into that on my own, and like I even explored that in this essay because, as Saraciea knows, I wrote a very different essay when I started, just because I felt like maybe my story, even like just my essay, wasn't Cuban enough. So my first essay was really focused on my grandma because she was born there and she was raised there. And then I realized that I wanted this essay to be more personal and more about me specifically. So yeah, so even writing this, I really battled that, which is why I was excited to write it.
Absolutely. And it going through the editorial process with Zakiya was really cool because like you just mentioned, you don't feel like you have the words to even explain to someone like, this is my identity and now I have to sort of like bring in all of these facts or all of this history to make it seem believable for you to believe that I am of this place or that I have roots here. So thank you for sharing that. Mark, let's have you go next.
Yeah, I love that you brought up, Zakiya, how things changed in the editorial process, because mine changed a lot too, largely because of Saraciea and Saraciea pushing me to be like, there are gaps here. Why did you not talk about this thing? I could see you just reference it, but why aren't you expanding on it? And it was an interesting process too, because I was a little surprised to be asked to write nonfiction, because so I was like ready to go with the story, and it was like, no, that's not what this is. And I had to think about, what am I going to write about? I spent a lot of time writing nonfiction, specifically with Mark Reads and Mark Watches, which is like this whole thing I did before I was an author. And so once I was thinking about, how am I going to write anything that's going to feel relatable or at least understandable to a younger audience, I came up with this really weird format that's both second person, but it's sort of a letter to myself, but it's not. And I just sort of ran with it. And what I really wanted to talk about, so my piece is called Eres un Pocho, and it specifically talks about that word. And a lot of us who are not raised in a traditional culture or in a specific sort of like community, we get called that word a lot. And younger, I only associated that word with bullying. It was just a mean thing to be called. It was a mean thing to be referred to. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand where it really came from. And so this essay that I wrote is me grappling with that term and understanding what my proximity was to whiteness because of being adopted. And because of being adopted, to be very frank, I didn't say this so much in exactly the same words in the essay, but being adopted by a racist, like being adopted by someone who does not understand what it meant to adopt two brown boys and what it meant to raise them in Southern California, where they desperately wanted a connection to their culture and a connection to other people. And as they, as my brother and I, begin to explore that, what sort of conflict we had with our adoptive mom. So it is the piece that was very difficult to write at times. But you know what? Thank you, Saraciea. I'm really happy with how it ended up turning out, because it became sort of this manifesto to myself about how those of us who have been in such difficult and challenging circumstances, how we can continue to challenge ourselves and to challenge our perceptions of what it means to be Latinx and what it means to be queer and how those things intersect. And so it became this like really thorny personal thing that I didn't expect it to, and I'm just really happy with what the end result is.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the gaps. There were some gaps, like you said, and I was like, there's a story here. Can we dig deeper? Because you just, jumped over a couple of years. And I was like, I kind of want to know what happened here. But, let us know.
Yeah.
But what I really loved about your essay is, we talk about turning a lot of these stereotypes on their heads, right? And like reclaiming our identity and saying like, oh, you may think Latinx is this one thing, but it's not, right? Like we're allowed to be whatever we want to be and to define our culture, our race, however we want to. We don't have to prove to you that we are enough. Like we're just gonna live and bask in our goodness, and that's it. And I feel like at the start of your essay, you're tackling this, and you seem so unsure of yourself, and by the end, it's like, well, maybe, but like I know who I am now, and like you can't dictate that for me because I stand firm in these roots, and I love that because there are so many young people, even adults, who just struggle with identity. They're like, oh, well, this person said I don't speak Spanish, so I'm not Latinx, or I didn't grow up eating rice and beans, so I'm not Latinx. And it's like, no, like not everyone even eats rice and beans, So I'm really excited for people to read your essay, but also, I thought it was really important for you to talk about being adopted, because there are lots of people who get adopted into these different types of families. And I feel like people struggle with that, especially like the youth. They struggle with that. They don't really have an outlet because we're all searching for identity anyway. When we're at that age, we're all trying to figure ourselves out. And then you have this added weight of just feeling disconnected. But by the end of your piece, you were much more connected. Natasha, I want to hear from you because your poem is just, I feel like you came through with a blade and was just slicing up the page. So talk to us a little bit about your piece and how you weaved in your identity into it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I was angry. I mean, so it did come from a place of anger, and so my work, a lot of what I try to work through in my writing is being multiracial, being white presenting, being Jewish, having all these different identities within me, and sort of a common theme so far that we've all talked about is never really feeling ownership or the ability to do that proudly and be who we are without being questioned or without having to prove it. And something specifically with my Brazilian heritage that I've always felt that I couldn't really claim it was I don't speak Portuguese. And
Right.
that was a big thing for me growing up, and that was sort of, so when I wrote Color Me In, when I wrote my debut, I actually didn't include the main character. It's nonfiction. I mean, it's fiction, obviously, but it's based off my own experiences. And the main character is Black and Jewish, which are two of the identities that I also am. And I didn't include Brazilian, and I really regret that. And the reason I did when I looked back was I was like, it felt like too much. Like I was like, how can I include that too in a book? And then I'm like, but hello,
Right.
I'm alive. I'm, you know what I mean? Like
Right,
I'm alive.
right.
I'm alive, but it's not like I'm alive, right? So it exists. And so I was like mad at myself that I erased that part of my journey in and as a result in that book, that journey could have had that aspect as well. And so when I was writing this poem, it's called Caution Song, and it's about this experience that I often feel when I meet new people or I'm in new places, and we're just, it comes up organically where I'm from, what my background is. And what I've noticed specifically when I talk about being Brazilian is first, like, someone will like test me with like a language thing, or have you been to this place? And then if I can't correctly answer, then it immediately turns into this sexualization and this fetishization, I can't say that word, of what that, so it's like, okay, so that's what that means, right? That's what being Brazilian means in their eyes. And that then I have to like play that up. And that bothers me because that's, not every Brazilian is a swimsuit model, right? Like not every Brazilian looks a certain way. And that's messed up that you're saying, okay, well, we'll believe you if you like play this part for us. so that it makes us like be like, okay, we recognize that then. And so the poem was just a little bit of like, I'm all of these things. I'm gonna be all of those things, and if that bothers you, then you will reap the consequences.
Right, then too bad.
Yeah.
My favorite line is, if you call me spicy, and I was just like,
Well, right, because it's
that
like
is
a thing. Like, so many people have called me spicy, and I'm like, okay, really though? Like, what does spice do?
right, right. When I'm among friends and they say, Saraciea, you're getting spicy, if they're people of color, I'm like, I know what you mean. But if,
Right,
if they're not a person of color, I'm like, what do you mean by that? I don't
right,
know. It's a question
right,
mark. Question
right.
mark. But
It
you
could, it
actually
could,
bring up. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I was just gonna say it could mean that it's something they're not used to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then you're gonna go sip your tea.
Yeah.
But Natasha, you actually bring up something really important where you mentioned sort of not hiding a piece of yourself, but trying to figure out which identity is more relatable, right? Like which one will people be able to accept, right? Where you were saying, I only put these two parts of my identity in your first book, and it's like, no, like you can be whatever you want, and I think for me on my journey in figuring out where my family came from and who we are, it was just really intense because I was discovering it, as a kid, and like a cousin would say like, oh, you're Honduran, and then I got older and people were like, it's not Honduran, it's Honduran, and so it's like having all of these teachable moments where people were teaching me about my culture, and most people probably would have been offended by that or got really pissed off, but for me, I was like, well, I don't know. And I want to know. So I have to do the research. I have to ask questions. I have to sort of, become obsessed and get all of these answers because, I want to be able to define my own identity. I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror and say, I am, Black, Indigenous, whatever. Like, I want to be able to tell you and dictate, my own thing. I don't want society to tell me who I am. And, that brings me to your piece, Kahlil, because I felt like, I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn. And in your piece, you were describing what Blackness was like in Brooklyn and in New York. But then you go to Panama and you've had this, completely different experience. So can you talk a little bit about your identity as a Black man and what that experience was like for you growing up in Brooklyn and then going back home and visiting and seeing how Black people were there?
Well, what I will say, my chapter or story is called Paraíso Negro. For those who don't know, would mean Black Paradise.
Black
Paraíso is
Paradise. It's
that was
best
that
best
title is all
title.
Saraciea also. So I got to give you credit for adding that. I was just gonna call it Paraíso, but
And I was like, no,
um,
no, we gotta put that in there. Black Paradise.
yeah, I thought that was amazing. You know, growing up in my family, it's tons of pretty much only Black people. I didn't really know that we were different in the fact that the family spoke Spanish. I'm not gonna say myself, I'm not fluent, but I didn't know that Black people speaking Spanish was such a rare thing to other people from the outside. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize that's how I started going to school, and being in Brooklyn obviously is heavily West Indian, and learning about other people's cultures was really cool. But I started to feel like I'm a minority here. You know what I mean? Everybody was from Trinidad and Jamaica and Barbados, and everybody had common ground on things like curry chicken and carnivals and things of that nature. Uh, Music reflected all of that as well. But everything that I was into was just a bit different and not what they were used to, meaning my friends, other classmates that I went to school with. So going into, writing this piece, I just wanted to sort of give a coming of age story as to how I came to realize, where we stood in this world. And I think going back to Panama as a kid at 6 years old for the first time was like just eye opening to know that we inhabit these uh, Latin nations, pretty heavily in some areas, and the places that I visited, there was just no shortage of us, and I never thought I would be writing something like this, but it was extremely cathartic and fun for me to go back and sort of relive those moments of long summers and culture shock and just good times. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you definitely did. You definitely did, I will say, what is one stereotype that you just feel like no matter what, people always say it about you and you're like, well, this again, I think for me I always get, oh, you must not just be Black
Mm.
because you have good hair. I get that all the time. And it's both among people of color and just non people of color. People are like, "Oh, well, you must have something else. You can't just be Black," because I'm just like, yeah, I'm Black, and then I'll tell them like, yeah, I'm also Honduran. Yeah, sure, but my first thing is I'm Black. So what's one stereotype that you feel like you always get no matter what?
I don't know if I could call it a stereotype.
We can
What I
start with
could
Mark,
say is that
maybe. Oh, go ahead, Kahlil.
oh
Go
oh my
Khalil.
bad. I
Go
didn't know
ahead,
if it's for
Khalil.
me. I'll get it done.
Go
No,
ahead.
go
I,
ahead.
what I would say is people just don't expect you to say that you're Panamanian, right? Like, so I kind of touch on that in my story that it's a running joke with my friends that I'm associated with being Haitian because I have a lot of Haitian friends that people just think you're Haitian too, and it's like it was a running joke of like I'm Panamanian. They're like, no, you're Haitian, Kahlil. And so people just don't expect me to be Panamanian, and that's sort of the premise of my whole story. That when you look at me, that's not your first guess, and I guess it's one long story of just not. Well, I guess the whole book essentially is about not judging books by its covers, essentially. you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I I would
Mark,
say
did
I
you want to
think
go
one of
next?
the yeah. I was thinking like one thing that I struggle with, or at least to represent in the piece, is this notion, you know, when you're, especially here in America. I grew up in Southern California specifically. I grew up around a lot of people who had dark features, who looked like me, who looked like that I could be part of their family, and so. But the big thing that I was trying to deal with in this specific piece is what happened as I got further and further out of that community, and especially once I got to college and once I started getting out in the world, and particularly as I got involved as an activist, is people looking at you and just assigning a narrative to you. And the one that I have been dealing with all my life, still to this day, um, is especially when you are in very white spaces, which, unfortunately in the book world, we still are in a lot of ways when you go to these conferences and festivals. And it still happens where, I mean, though, granted, this is obviously in the before times, this is happening over Zoom, thankfully, is this people seeing me as the help and seeing me and assuming I'm not there to attend or contribute, that I'm there in this capacity to assist. And I think it comes from a lot of obviously very racist notions. But the thing that I struggle with as I have tried to be a professional person in the world is people looking at me and just assuming, oh, you can't be one of us. There's no way. I can't
Right.
even imagine you being a person who is a writer, who being a person who is creative, and it is a stereotype that feeds off in different ways. When I'm viewed by agents of the state, for example, the obvious assumption is, oh, you are a drug dealer, you are a drug addict, you are a thief, all of these things or whatnot, which obviously has a much more dramatic and generally much more violent end result than when I'm at like a book festival or whatnot. But it is a thing that I wanted to talk about too, is where that comes from and how we're sort of told that if you're a good person and you do the right things in our society, you'll be left alone, you'll be treated nice, and it's like, no, that's actually not how a lot of people view us at all. So yeah, that was the thing that I was trying to like grapple with in my essay.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree so very much. I also work as a publicist, and I've gone on a couple of book tours, and obviously most publicists wear a lot of black, and I've been mistaken for like hotel support, servers at restaurants, just random stuff where I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't work here. Yeah, no. Zakiya, oh, go ahead, Mark. Yep, you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say, because even, you know, Saraciea has been my publicist now for a few years now. Even interactions we've had through email where people just look at your name and they treat you differently just based on your name.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching those interactions unfold, and I'm just like, you wouldn't do this if your name was Stephanie. Like, it just wouldn't happen. You know, and so it's like, even that, just the name. Yeah, and I talk about it too, like having the weird interactions I have where people assume I'm Asian and then they're disappointed when I show up, and I'm like, what? That's like 3 levels of racism that I don't even want to deal with. Like, I don't even want to deal with like what's going on there. So like, seeing it with you and seeing the way, you know, I don't know. We could get into a whole thing because now I want to shit talk and I'm not going to do that. So.
Yes. I had some interesting stuff happen over emails. But yes, Zakiya, let's talk about a stereotype that you always get.
No, I mean, I was just gonna say I definitely have one of those stories. Like, this was before I got into publishing. I mean, I'm just gonna say where I worked. So I worked at BuzzFeed for like a hot second, and I remember I was leaving the bathroom, and like someone was coming in. She was white, and she was like, "Oh, are you done cleaning it?" And I was like,
ma'am.
No, girl. I was just using the bathroom like everybody does. Thanks so much. But anyway, no, to your question, I feel like very similar to Kahlil. Like, I feel like, so I'm also Jamaican. And so when I tell people I'm Jamaican, they're like, cool, love that for you. Do you like oxtail? But when I say I'm Cuban, it's like, oh, like, is your mom from there? Like, is it your dad? Like, how are you? Like, I get all the questions. Like, Jamaican, very easy for them to believe. Cuban, they're like, it's not, the math ain't mathing for me. And so I just feel like there's like the stereotype of like what a Cuban person looks like. Like, I think they think like, you know, Camila Cabello, or like, she was like the first one that came to mind, or like Pitbull, I guess. And so, which I'm like, there are a lot of Afro-Cubans, so I was like, disrespectful. But yeah, they're just like, there's no way you could be Cuban. And it's like, but I am, like, surprised. I don't know what to tell you. So I think that's really the biggest one, and it's always bothered me because, yeah, like, if I say I'm Cuban, I feel like I always have to give, like, my ancestral history, which is very frustrating.
Right. Absolutely. That is frustrating. Natasha, I know you have some stories, because I always see talk about it on social, but if you can let us know, you know, what's one of the major stereotypes that you usually are always hit with.
Well, you know, it's interesting because obviously I present as white, and so white people say some wild stuff around me. Feel real comfortable getting spicy. And, you know, so there's that. Obviously, I talked about it earlier with just like, when it does come out that I am Brazilian, people automatically sort of shift the conversation into this weird, sexually explicit, uncomfortable place that is weird. But the thing I guess I'll say the most is what Zakiya was just saying. Like, I'll be like, it'll come out like, oh yeah, you know, my mom's biracial. Oh, where's she from? Oh, she's half Liberian, half Brazilian. And they'll be like, oh. And they'll be like, oh yeah, my dad's Jewish. And they'll be like, oh. And I'm like, okay, listen. This like isn't that big of a deal. And no, I'm not gonna show you pictures to prove it. And, you know, and it's just it is, there's just these layers of like, but how, and like, do you mean adopted? Like, for a long time I remember people just automatically would assume I was adopted, because in my family on my mom's side I really am the only white face. Like I really am. And so people just really can't wrap their brains around that, and it's difficult for them. And so it's like this digging like in me, trying to figure out like, where does it make sense, like make it make sense. And I'm like, I can't do that for you. If you it's and it gets to a place of like, nobody should have to, and like either accept it,
Right.
and like, if you like, Google is free, please by all means take your questions there. They have some
100%,
answers.
100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. My family is varying shades of, light skin to black skin, and people like we'll be at the family reunion, and if anyone brings over friends, they're like, "So, who are your cousins?" And we're like, "This is all family," and they're like, "But this person is white and that person is very dark skin," and we're like, "Yes. We come in all shades of melanin, deal with it." I'm going to pivot really quickly and take some audience questions. So this is a really good question. How would you recommend Latinx writers learn more about their roots when they didn't grow up with the culture and their first and second generation family members are distant, old, and or have passed? This is a really tough question to unpack, and so I'm gonna start us off, but please feel free to jump in. I think this is really personal for me because part of my family, like I mentioned, my family is Honduras, but also Garifuna, and none of the generations that I'm close to speak the language. All of the older generations speak the language, and we've had a lot of elders pass. And so it's a lot of oral history. And so right now, how I've been sort of tapping into that is reaching out to younger, Garifuna people and being like, oh, let's build community. Because, once elders in your family start to pass, or, for example, in Mark's case, if you're adopted, there's still a way for you to build community. So you obviously need to do some due diligence and make sure that those community spaces you're building are safe, because you don't want to be in community with someone and it can be harmful. So you do have to be careful, but there are other ways that you can learn about your culture. You can do family tree mapping. I know lots of people do the DNA test now, and we'll do the family tree line. I've had a few friends actually do that and connect with, people that are in their family, and they're like, well, this was great so-and-so, great so-and-so. I think we're related, and they've connected in that way. So there are still ways, but it is really hard. It's really challenging. What I will say also is interview whoever's in your family right now, and start to record that history, because whoever's left, they do know stuff. And when you start to ask questions, they'll tell you either I don't know, or they can connect you to someone else in the family who knows a little bit more. And then you can sort of start to build your own family history and connect. But I would love to hear what the other panelists have to say. I'm immediately thinking of you, Mark, because I know you personally have done a lot of this community building as well, and also research.
And it is really hard, especially if you're adopted and you don't have the information. Like if you don't have the name, literally, I mean, it seems so simple too, but like a huge issue with my brother and I trying to find information on our biological father is we just didn't have his legal name until like 2 or 3 years ago. And so how do you even build anything from that? But what I tell people, because I do get asked a question about this, how do you build community if you're not a part of it? Most of my cultural touchstones are from growing up in Southern California. So the things that I am familiar with are things from, Salvadoreños. They're from people from Guatemala. They're from people who are Mexican, people who identify as Chicana or Chicano. And so there are things I understand. There are things that I have participated in culturally. And so I consider those are my touchstones. Those are the things that I know, that I'm familiar with. But the other thing is that as you are doing research, I have found that people who you want to be in community with, who are of your community, is to just be honest about what are these things that you've experienced that have created these setbacks, that have created this sort of distance. Because when I tell people like, here's my story, like the very basic elements of it and like that, and say, I'm constantly in a journey to discover more about myself and my community. And if you approach people with that sort of optimism and that openness, like you are willing to learn and you want to learn more about yourself and your people, it is amazing how that gets rid of so much of the social awkwardness at the beginning, where they're like, "Oh, you want to know? Okay, great. Here, I'm going to talk you through this recipe. Here's this family secret." Like, people want you to be in community with them, and I think that, you know,
Absolutely.
and I definitely, yeah, and like even writing this, the piece that I did, a lot of it is that struggle of thinking like, I think a lot of people who feel like they don't belong in the whatever Latinx umbrella, like wherever they are underneath that. A lot of that, they instead choose to lash out against people who are Latinx and people who are grown up in this culture, or in a very specific culture. And I really wanted to approach my piece from this understanding of, yes, I was excluded, but the reason I was excluded was not from people in my community. It was whiteness. Whiteness is the thing that separated us. White supremacy is the reason all of these things happened, that word, ocho, even exists. Like when you get down, because I talk about what that word actually means, and where it came from, and this idea of rotting fruit, and this idea that you're a sellout. And it's coming to my understanding now that like I get why people call me that, because I reminded them of what this country does to them and how it changes them. So I approach it with that sort of honesty. I was not raised with Spanish. I have had to learn it largely by myself. You know, I still take 2 to 3 hours of Spanish lessons like over Zoom a week. I'm still learning because I would love to have that fluency. But I also know, you know, I love, you know, my tutor is based in Ecuador, and I love talking to her and learning stuff about her community and learning stuff about the way they do things, and not just word usage, but like how do they throw parties? How do they celebrate certain things? What are the things that they celebrate? So just approach people with honesty and tell them that you are trying as best as you can to be in community with them. And I really think that approach will help make it a lot easier.
I agree. Does anyone else want to add anything before I move on to the next question?
I was just gonna say I agree. Like I feel that anytime I meet someone who's Cuban, I'm hyped. I'm like, yes, tell me more. And I have a few friends that like now when I have questions about stuff, like I remember I was trying to write like a horror story, which like I don't usually write horror, but I wanted to know if there were any like Cuban scary stories. You know, so I texted my friend who's Cuban. I was like, girl, what's the tea? And she was like, oh girl, I don't know, let me ask my mom. And so, you know, having those kind of connections where I feel like I can, because I asked my grandma first and she was like, you know what you're trying to ask me. And so having people that I can go to for questions like that. And then also like I really just want to go to Cuba. Like I've never been, my mom went before. So I really just want to go to Havana and really like specifically I want to go with my grandma. So she can show me, you know, where she grew up and like the places she wanted to go, because she's told me about, because she lived there until she was 18, so she had her teens there, you know, so she went to the spots. So I want to know if they're still there and like what that was like for her, and I really want to see it through her eyes. So hopefully, you know, once this pandemic is over, we can make that happen. But for me, that's really like going to her for stories and then talking to other Cubans about their stories.
Amazing.
The one thing I would say is to approach it in the way that makes you most comfortable, and to not feel the obligation to fit every thing into, you know, whatever you're told that that identity is. Like you're allowed to be whatever part of that is right for you. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to know every musician. You don't have to know every recipe. You don't have to do every dance. Like you don't have to know the language. Like you're allowed to be who you are, and that's still valid. So that's, I guess, my addition.
Amazing. So we have about like 2 more questions. I'm gonna make these a little more light. So what was the first book you read with a Latinx character you could relate to? So I know you might also think of maybe the first Latinx writer you read that you could relate to. So either character or writer. I love all of the thinking faces. I'll go first. Oh no, go ahead, Zakiya.
Okay, I was gonna say I want to say it was called Cuba 15. I think it was a YA novel about this girl who was having her quince. And it was the first book I read where the character was Cuban. She like grew up in Miami. And I felt really like seen. Like even though like I didn't have a quince, like just the family dynamics and like her situation growing up, and like I think she had like it was I don't know if she had a single mom or just like the woman in the family were like really the stronghold, which like for me, my family is very much a family of women. And so I just thought it was so cool that this book was about this girl who was Cuban because I never read a book about that before. So that's one that really stuck with me.
Love that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I don't know if this certainly isn't the first, but I had a baby almost 2 years ago, and it actually like makes your brain stop working. So I've like forgotten a lot of things. But I will say the book that I can think of most recently that I was like, oh wow, like I really relate to this was a really recent YA book called Don't Date Rosa Santos by Nina Moreno, and there's just like a lot of gorgeous like family connections, the connection between her and her grandmother in the book, and I read it and I like sent her an email after and I was like I feel like this like her identity is it's about a Cuban family and I'm not Cuban, but I was like this could have been my family. It feels
Yeah.
so similar and relatable, and so that's the first book that popped up in my head. It's certainly not the first that I read, but what are the years before? Who knows? I can't remember anything.
Love that. Kahlil, Mark, do y'all have a book that you can think of?
None comes to mind for me, to be honest with you. I wish I knew.
Okay.
I'm having a moment.
That's okay.
So I remember the first character. The first character was Ricky from Some of My So-Called Life, played by Wilson Cruz. Especially because he was both Latinx and gay, and even if his story was centered on the struggle, my life was too. I was kicked out of my house for being gay, and that character was everything to me. Book-wise, the first character was I can't remember his name, but in Bless Me Ultima. And I read that in 8th grade, and then in 9th grade, it was Esperanza from House on Mango Street, which changed my life. That was like the one that unlocked everything. Bless my 9th grade English teacher, Miss Alford, who might be watching this. Like she was the one who made me realize I could be a writer because it showed me like you can be this and also write, and I literally did not know that was possible until I read that book.
Love that. Love that. Well, we have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to do a fast round and just shout out what comes to mind first, okay? Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
T.
Coffee.
Both.
I'm a tea.
Sorry,
I'm a tea
I
too.
drink both.
Slime or clay?
Slime.
Clay.
Yeah, clay.
This is a cursed question. I won't answer it. I don't like it.
How did I
Will be
know
used
Mark was
against
gonna
me.
say like neither? No,
It'll be used
thank
against
you.
me at some point.
Okay, favorite genre, horror or fantasy?
Fantasy.
Fantasy.
Horror.
I'll go Harvard.
100%.
I'll go Harvard.
Horror. 100%. Zakiya, we need to talk.
Okay.
Mark,
Okay.
no, it's a no for me. Absolutely not.
Can you each quickly go around and say what you're working on next?
Who goes first?
Who wants to start? Oh, okay, I'll go. Man, well, I'm currently a
Yes,
columnist at
you go,
Ebony,
Kahlil.
and I'm not quite sure what I got cooking for next week, but my column drops every week. In the literary world, I'm hoping to come up with an anthology of my own blog posts that I've been doing for over a decade, and foray that into a book in the future. So I'm working on that at the moment, and more on that in the future, I suppose.
All right, awesome. Zakiya, you want to go next?
See, I knew you were gonna do this. Yeah, no, I am working on my hopefully debut YA novel. about a girl who is dealing with the 1-year anniversary of her father's passing, which also happens to coincide with her high school graduation.
Really excited for it. Mark, do you want to go next?
Yeah. In September 21st, my first middle grade book, The Insiders, is out. I also, as of 2 weeks ago, or 1 week ago, I just turned in my next YA novel. It is a contemporary thriller about two boys in a cult, sort of. That's all I'm going to say about it. It's a nightmare novel. I'm very proud of it. And I also have a secret novel out in October that I can't tell you about.
Say less.
There we go.
Well, we'll wait for that. Natasha, what do you have cooking?
I have a second book that is, I can't really say much about and is not finished, but it'll happen at some point. I am in another really awesome anthology that was just announced. That is a magical murder mystery that's coming out in fall 2022, and I am developing a TV show for Disney Plus.
Amazing.
Woo!
That's exciting.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. Congrats. I'm currently working on my YA fantasy that I've been working on since 2015. So eventually it will get finished, I think. I don't know.
Sure
but it's a
will.
Honduran-inspired fantasy, so it'll be a first of its kind if no one else writes anything. So if you're Honduran and you want to write fantasy, just go sit back down and let me do it first. No, I'm just kidding. But I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. I've been notified that everyone has been saying how much they appreciate and resonate with a lot of the things we talked about today. So thank you all for sharing your stories with us and telling us a little bit more about your essays. Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed will publish in September, and hopefully you'll be able to see all of us on social. Be sure to follow us. I'm at SJ_Fennell on social. If y'all can drop your handles and then we can sign off. So Kahlil, go first.
Oh, sure. My Instagram is damn it pops. And my Twitter is damn pops. That's about it.
Got it. Mark, drop yours.
I go by Mark Does Stuff everywhere.
Perfect. Zakiya.
I'm at Zakiya Jamal on Twitter and at Zakiya N Jamal on Instagram.
Natasha.
I'm at Tashi Diaz on Twitter and at Natasha Erica Diaz on Instagram, I think.
And here's a publicist pro tip. All of your social media should all have the same handles for ease. And with that,
listen,
YALLWEST, thank you so very much for hosting us. Come on, Mark, I had to go chaotic evil. I had to go chaotic evil at the end.
Thank you.
It was just so fitting.
Ma'am, some things are available and some things aren't on the platforms. Okay. I tried my best. There's just one extra letter. That's it. Just one. Right in the middle.
Try harder. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much to the lovely folks at YALLWEST for hosting this wonderful Latinx diaspora panel. And thank you to all of the attendees for tuning in and for giving us some questions. It's been such a pleasure. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Saraciea.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome.